Hi, this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and today I'd like to share a brief video on an issue that's in the news. I don't normally do this. I don't comment much on politics or current events. I usually stay focused on education, but recently a news event occurred and some commentary on that event, which I found interesting and thought would be a good opportunity to illustrate the usefulness of Aesop's Fables, which many of our students are studying in the academy. Yesterday, my wife and I drove down to Fort Benning in Georgia because my son Jonathan was graduating from airborne school, which was pretty cool. But we had 6 hours to drive down there, and so we had time to kill, and we were listening to the news on NPR on the radio, and there was an interview being conducted with the detectives in the recent Highland Park shooting in Illinois, where a 21 or 22-year-old man opened fired on a crowd of people attending a 4th of July parade. And in this radio interview, the interviewer was asking the detective, how can we prevent these situations from happening? Is it the gun store who's at fault? Are they selling guns to people who shouldn't be allowed to buy guns? Is it the lawmakers' fault? Are our gun laws just not addressing the problems we have? Is it the police? Are they not fulfilling their responsibility? Is it the courts? Are they letting criminals back onto the streets and putting the public in danger? What is the problem that's behind these shootings? And is there any way that we can prevent these terrible events from happening in the future? And the detective's response was very interesting to me. He said that the problem in this, at least in this case, the problem was not the gun store owners. The problem was not the police. The problem was not the lawmakers. There was something else that was ultimately responsible for this situation being possible. And again, we're not saying that the criminals are not ultimately responsible for their own actions. That's true. But those actions are very often influenced by other things or permitted by other things. And if we're ever going to prevent these kinds of public shootings, we have to ask the question, is there something that we can do to make this at least more difficult for shooters? Now, you have to know some of the background, and I just learned this yesterday as we were listening to this radio program. This young man, he's 22 years old, living at home with his parents. His parents have, these aren't biological parents, of course. These are divorced, remarried, dating, whatever, the typical American domestic mess that is the cause of so many troubles and is just ignored, as if any domestic arrangement is of equal value. But what happened was 2 or 3 years ago, this young man, when he was 19 years old, threatened his mother and threatened to kill members of his family. He didn't have any guns or anything like that. He had some knives, but he threatened that he was going to kill his family for whatever the fighting was about at the time. And his mother felt scared by these threats, and so she called the police. And this happened several years ago. The police came to investigate the situation. But as the mother thought about the situation, and she thought about her son and what would happen, she decided to not pursue the situation and not press charges. And so the police came talked to the mother, and they left, and nothing was done. The mother was concerned at the time for her son's benefits. She was concerned about what would happen if her son had a criminal record. He wouldn't be able to get a job. It would have all sorts of negative impact in his life. And so she decided to not press charges to spare her son that trouble. She chose to not press charges for criminal activities carried out by her son. Threatening to kill people is illegal. She chose not to press charges thinking of his welfare and possibly her own welfare. After all, he's living in her house. She's obviously providing for him. So she made a decision with reference to the law and to justice that was based on her own personal and his own personal welfare. Well, she succeeded in keeping his criminal record clear at that time. When he was 21 years old, 2 years later, he decided that he wanted to kill people. But this time he decided to buy some guns and do it big time. And so he went as a 21-year-old to a gun store, and he legally purchased powerful weapons. And the reason why he was able to purchase those weapons was because he had a clean criminal record. He was not a person who was free from criminal activity. He was a person with a clean criminal record because his mother, who knew about his criminal activity, did not press charges against him. In doing that, she protected her son from harm, but she put the entire community in danger. She chose not to discipline her son or allow to happen to him what is just, but to protect him from what was just. And that led to a horrific tragedy on the 4th of July. Now, as I said at the beginning, the reason why I wanted to share this is because it relates to one of Aesop's fables, and I think it shows us how helpful Aesop's fables can be in everyday life. I'd like to read with you one of Aesop's fables, namely the fable of the boy and his mother, and talk about it a little bit. Let's take a look and read it together. The fable of the boy and his mother. A little boy who went to school stole one of his schoolfellow's books and took it home. His mother, so far from correcting him, took the book and sold it, and gave him an apple for his pains. In the course of time, the boy became a robber, and at last was tried for his life and condemned. He was led to the gallows, a great crowd of people following, and among them his mother bitterly weeping. He prayed the officers to grant him the favor of a few parting words with her, and his request was freely granted. He approached his mother, put his arm around her neck, and making as though he would whisper something in her ear, bit it off. Her cry of pain drew everybody's eyes upon them, and great was the indignation that at such a time he should add another violence to his list of crimes. "Nay, good people," said he, "do not be deceived. My first theft was of a book. which I gave to my mother. Had she whipped me for it, instead of praising me, I should not have come to the gallows now that I am a man. This is the fable of the boy and his mother. In this situation with this Highland Park shooting, we saw a few years back that a mother had a choice to make. She watched as her son committed a crime, and she had to make a decision about whether she should go through the normal procedure of justice and file charges against her son for breaking the law, for the sake of the common good, which is the purpose of the law, or whether she should think about her own personal welfare and benefits, or even the benefits of her son, and choose not to go through with what would be just. In the same way, in this fable, we read of a mother who learns that her young son stole a book from one of his classmates, and she winks at this childish, we can say sin, because he knew it was wrong. She winks at it and chooses not to punish him, not to whip him, as he says later, not to grab him by the ear and drag him back to school and make him admit what he did and make sure that the other child gets his book back. She chose not to do any of those things which would be just, but instead she chose to turn the event for her own personal benefit, or she might have thought for her son's own benefit. After all, he walked away with a reward. He walked away with an apple as a payment for the book that she sold. The boy was encouraged in his crime by this lack of accountability, by this lack of discipline, lack of justice. And he went on to rob and commit criminal acts against other members of the community because of this neglect of his mother, as he says again at the end of the story. And yet when he's being brought to the gallows, being dragged into prison, as it were, or even worse, to the death penalty, there's Mom with her emotions crying, oh, how can my son, I can't believe he would do this. He's such a good boy. He's not his character, all the stuff we hear on the news. Putting on this show and gaining the sympathy and, sorrows of all of the people watching. But the boy, unlike anyone else, knows. He knows where his habit of stealing developed. He knows how it developed, and looking back, he has some anger towards his mother for not helping him. And again, this is his fault. He's the robber. He's being punished. That's just. But he looks back with some just anger at the way that his mother, when he was young, dealt with his behavior and saw where his bad habits were allowed to develop, and basically curses his mother. And we can see the parallel between this story and the situation in Highland Park, where this mother saw the evil behavior of her younger son and chose not to punish it, not to give it what it justly deserved, nor to be merciful, for this leaving the public in danger is not an act of mercy. She chose to simply cover it for whatever motive she had in mind. And her choice kept that boy's criminal record clear, which allowed him to purchase the guns which allowed him to kill those people. Now, getting back to the original story, the police detective in this news interview explained that the gun store owner did everything that he was supposed to do according to the law. He did all of the necessary checks. Everything was above board. Everything was legal at the gun store. The gun store owner is in no way responsible for the situation. Don't blame the gun store owner. The police had the suspect apprehended the same day. They can only respond to things that happen. The police aren't in the streets, checking under every, under every car, behind every dumpster, trying to prevent future crime. That's not what the police do. The police respond when people do bad things, and they arrest suspects and bring them off the street into jail in an attempt to keep the public safe then and in the future. But they can't prevent criminal actions. It's not the police's fault that this young man killed these people. Thirdly, the laws, as this detective explained, the laws cover all of these situations. The laws include safeguards for all these situations. And if everyone in society plays their part and does their job, the law provides for these things to be prevented. And what the detective wisely explained was that our justice system, our legal system, the happiness and safety of the common good, or of the public, I should say, has a number of different levels of protection. One of them is the police, one of them is the courts, the prisons. There's all of these different levels of public safety. But there's one level, in fact, the first level, that our country is ignoring and neglecting. The first level of public safety takes place in the family. Parental discipline is the first level of public safety, of crime prevention. The family is the foundation of public safety. Children who are disciplined and handled according to the law and according to sound morals will be prevented from carrying out horrific crimes. Parents are with the children from their infancy, from their youngest, most docile years. Parents can prevent bad habits from developing. Parents can prevent minor criminal activity from developing into major criminal activity. In the case of this Highland Park shooter, his mother chose not to participate in this system of public safety. She chose not to do for her son what justice required. She chose to play the mommy culture game that I talk about, to baby her children, to let them get away with evil deeds, thinking only of her immediate benefit or of his selfish interests, taking no responsibility for the public welfare. She chose to keep his criminal record clean, and in our legal system, the criminal record is one of the things that disqualifies a person from buying weapons. As the detective explained, the legal system was there to protect us. The laws were written to protect us with sufficient forethought. The problem was that At the family level, justice wasn't done. And that is what allowed this whole situation to develop. Now, I'm not here to point fingers at the shooter or his family or anything like that. That's not my point. My point is that mother, 2 years ago, when she had that decision to make, didn't make a wise decision. She was thinking about her own son, thinking about herself, trying to avoid whatever trouble she could, probably hoping that things would get better and this would just go away and it would be a good lesson for him of how close he was to getting in trouble. But she didn't have good counsel. She didn't know how to make that decision, and she made the wrong decision. And what she feared in seeing her son get into trouble at that time led to her seeing her son get into far, far more trouble just a few years later. The study of Aesop's fables gives us exactly this kind of wisdom in our lives. Imagine if that woman would have been raised and taught the fable of the boy and his mother. When she had that decision to make, she might have sat there and thought, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? What's the right thing to do in this situation? And the fable would have warned her about fearing the discipline of her son. This fable would have warned her to think about the long-term consequences, not the short-term. It would have warned her from babying her bad little boy and allowing worse things to develop in his life. This fable would have taught that mother that she should go through with the normal process for justice, not concern herself with his criminal record, but with public safety and what's just according to the law. And that mother, if she would have done that, and of course this is all easy in hindsight, but if that mother would have made that tough choice, she could have saved not only those people who were killed and injured on the 4th of July, she could have saved her son's life. But she chose the short-sighted way and allowed him to suffer in the long term, again, in a far worse way. I can understand why that decision would be difficult, but in Aesop's fables, we see how they can come to our assistance in times when we have difficult decisions to make. And we can make those decisions in the light of this kind of practical wisdom. And Aesop's fables would have saved this mother from a bad decision and could have saved her son from a horrible crime and the lives of at least 7 people, as well as dozens of others who were injured as a result of this shooting. Aesop's fables are not just a study for little children, not curious little stories about animals. Aesop's fables are a source of real, practical, useful wisdom in everyday life. That's why I teach them as diligently and seriously as I do in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and that's why we'll see over time the benefits of this study in our children's lives, because when they have decisions to make, the fables of Aesop are going to help them. And that's the purpose of studying Aesop's fables. God bless.